Welcome to the Lifelong Rivals Sports Podcast. We are back. I'm Zach Kaufman with Ryan D'Amico following the NFL Draft.
Yeah, buddy. We are back and talk about the NFL Draft, something that a lot of people enjoy, watching, discussing, overreacting, about their team's picks.
This was, I felt like, one of the more eventful drafts we've had, with a lot of trades, a lot of movement, a lot of excitement around the players, especially at the top of the draft. So I was excited to see that. I definitely was intrigued with all the quarterbacks this year. That was one thing that really stood out to me that we haven't seen in the past, and a lot of quarterback needy teams that generated a lot of excitement in this draft. Heading into it, a lot of quarterback and a lot of running back needy teams and players to fill those positions. So it was very interesting to see where players fell as they went along here. And it was great to see it happen in Dallas there. I think that was a great location for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I like how they're moving it around. I do. I like how they're giving other cities a chance to host where, it was in New York for so long, and it originally started in Chicago, but it had been in New York for so long, and then they got back to Chicago a few years ago, and then last year it was in Philly, and Philly did a fantastic job. The national media loved the performance Philly did, and then I think Dallas did a pretty decent job. I mean, I heard some mixed reviews, but I think all in all, people were pretty pleased with it. So it's going to be interesting to see next year what location they decide to choose. But I do like how they're switching it up and giving other cities an opportunity to host and put on. And another thing I like they did is they kind of broke up. I don't know if you saw this, Zach, but they broke up the fan bases at the draft. So, like, if say you and I went to the draft, I think we had the opportunity to hang out together and sit together if we wanted to. But then we also had the opportunity of you going and sitting with the Cowboys fans, and then me going and sitting with the Eagles fans, which I think is a pretty cool idea.
Yeah, I definitely like that. That's something I didn't watch any of the NFL draft there on TV. I just was checking through all the results there, so I didn't get to see anything like that. But I do think it makes it fun for the reactions there for the teams, especially for that media coverage where you can go to a specific section. It makes it a lot more exciting for those people. It's like watching a team play at a bar in that city where everyone else is cheering it on too. It's got that same energy where you're around all these other fans. You got the same thing in common. I'm sure that would have been a fun event to be at there.
Yeah, the NFL draft is definitely something I've thought about, and have wanted to try and get to. I tried going last year when it was in Philly. They held a random raffle for tickets. I didn't win that, so I didn't buy any on the black market. I wasn't about to do that, and I didn't want to go down if I didn't have a ticket. But definitely something in the future I would like to attend. I think it would be pretty cool. So, look, as the draft, let's just dive right in. And I guess if you're cool, I guess we'll just kind of take a look at round one as a whole. Yeah. Just to kind of, that's kind of where everyone starts. That gets all the limelight. It gets one night devoted just to one round, which was Thursday, round one. And a team that has been, scrutinized a lot for just butchering draft picks. And they happen to have two picks in the top four in the 2018 NFL draft with the Cleveland Browns. They take Baker Mayfield at number one. And then they take cornerback Denzel Ward out of Ohio State at number 4, which surprised a lot of people. Zach, I'll jump right into it. What's your reaction from the two picks they made with having top 4 picks? I'll give you a multiple choice question. So out of those two picks, Mayfield and Denzel Ward, do you give it an excellent? Do you give it a good? Do you give it an average, a below average, or dog shit? Where do you rank the Cleveland's first round?
So the first thing that stands out to me is they set themselves up so well the last couple of years to put themselves in this situation to have these top picks. And I like that they kind of attacked it and went with who they thought was the best player. They didn't go off of what scouts thought or anything like that. Like whoever they were relying on, they confidently went with those picks. And some people thought Baker Mayfield wasn't a number 1 overall pick. Some people felt like Denzel Ward was drafted before he should have been and they could have traded down. I like how they approached it with the confidence they went in there. So I'd put it as a good. It could be proven to be excellent, but I still like it. I think they're continuing to move forward. They added a lot of veteran pieces this year, which is also going to help with some of these young players. I was surprised with the Ward pick because they added a lot of defensive back help this offseason going into this. But if that's someone they think is gonna contribute and he can do that, I'm in full support there.
I hate their draft. I hate their first round. I absolutely hate it. I hate Baker Mayfield. I don't think he's going to be successful at the next level. I think it's comical that this kid went number 1 in the draft. Like, that blows my mind. Like, that, I cannot wrap my head around that. Like when Adam Schefter tweeted out late Wednesday night, early Thursday morning, that there was rumblings that the Browns were leaning towards taking Baker Mayfield. And I was like, there's no way. This team can't be that fucking stupid. There's no way. And lo and behold, quarter after 8 rolls around, and they take Baker Mayfield. The Browns wonder why they're the Browns. It's for situations like this. Because you do stuff like this. Baker Mayfield is not someone that's going to win you a Super Bowl. He's just not. Like, he's not that type of quarterback. There's no quarterback out there like Baker Mayfield that has won a Super Bowl. There's just not. I mean, maybe Russell Wilson. Okay, that's one out of 52.
But see, is the Browns' goal to win a Super Bowl? Because that's where I disagree with you. They just want to make the playoffs. And eventually, Zach. I mean, yeah, you want to make the playoffs, but I mean, eventually, yeah, that's your goal. You want to bring this guy in because you think he's going to be there for the next 10 to 15 years, and he can win you championships. This guy's not going to do it. The Ward pick, I guess I can live with because he's the best cornerback in the draft, and we're in a throwing league nowadays in the NFL. It's a passing league, so you need good cornerbacks. Okay, I get that. But in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, I could be totally wrong, which I've been wrong before. But in my opinion, if you have 2 of the top 4 picks in the draft, you better get at least one of the best players in the draft, and they didn't get either. The 2 best all-around football players in this draft were Saquon Barkley and Bradley Chubb. And they didn't get either one of them. And that is why I put this as a failure for the Browns. Because you want to take Mayfield at 1. Fine. Okay, fine. You want a quarterback. You're in love with him. You say, I don't want anyone else to get this kid. All right. But then turn around and take Barkley or Chubb at 4. You have to do it. Barkley wasn't there. I get it. But Chubb was there. And they passed him over. And they let Denver get it. Now, all of a sudden, Denver has a nice little pass rush with Bradley Chubb and Von Miller over there. So, Zach, if I was a Browns fan, I don't know what I'd do. Because I feel bad for Browns fans. I genuinely feel bad for them. Because there have been times where I felt awful as an Eagles fan. But then I sit back and I think, you know what? Ryan? You could be a Browns fan, and things could be a hell of a lot worse. So I'm not a fan of their first round. I think they screwed it up. I do. I think they screwed it up. So, but you seem to be okay with it. You think. So I mean, if you're okay with it, then let me ask you a quick question. You think Baker Mayfield will be a good quarterback in the NFL? Then I guess you have to believe that. Then if you kind of like their draft. Yeah, I think he's going to be a good quarterback. I don't feel like he's a Super Bowl winning quarterback like you were saying, but that's not what I feel like the Browns need. They need to start progressing in the right direction. And if he's not right in 4 or 5 years when that rookie contract ends, they can move on to someone else and they have a team in place that's much better or has playoff experience or whatever they've gotten to at that point. And if he is right for that, then he can keep going. They can sign him to a big contract and go from there. But I'd still like it. I think all of the top quarterbacks in this draft had some kind of flaws to them, and they're going to have to. You're going to get that in any draft. And they went with the guy they liked the best. I've heard a lot of amazing things about Baker Mayfield and his leadership, which is something that's huge when you're trying to build a franchise up, when you're trying to turn it around. If you've got negative people that aren't working hard, that aren't doing their job, that aren't learning the playbook, anything like that, that's going to immediately bring that team down. And if he's going to be a leader, if he's going to be moving them forward, I think that's a great pick, and I fully support it. And I think this is different from a typical Browns pick because they got their selection of quarterback here. They've been going through the Johnny Manziels and the Brandon Whedons and the guys towards the end of the draft where there's already some quarterbacks picked over, and they're just kind of taking a longer shot at these guys and hoping they develop. Deshaun Kaiser last year. They've gone for a lot of these like second, third tier quarterbacks, where this one, they got their pick of all of them. And they were able to go with the guy that they felt most confident with. So I still like what they did there.
Speaking of their choice of quarterbacks, and speaking of the quarterbacks in this draft, let's run down it. Let's run down the quarterbacks that were selected in the first round, and kind of we'll just kind of go through, Zach, and just kind of give our opinion on each one, and maybe how you think that each one will fit in their in the city and with the team that they got drafted with. So we talked about Mayfield already. He goes number 1 to Cleveland. Then the next quarterback off the board is Sam Darnold, who goes to the Jets at number 3. Quarterback at USC, who some people thought last year was a surefire lock, number 1 pick. And then he kind of had a down year at USC compared to the year before. And, maybe, slipped a little, maybe 2 picks. He still went number 3, which is nothing to sneeze at. But, I it's weird because I think Darnold can be good. I think Darnold's going to be good. Like, I think he has all the intangibles. I think he can play in cold weather. He's that kind of guy. He's from California, yes, but he's more like he's like blue collar, which you don't see a lot out of California kids. But I think he'll push. I think he'll push to start early over Josh McCown and Teddy Bridgewater, who's there now. I think he'll push to start. But I think he also could benefit if he doesn't win the job from just sitting a little bit, because the Jets don't have a ton of weapons. So like he gets thrown in there and just shits the bed because he doesn't have a lot to work with. Maybe that's a downfall. But I ultimately think Darnold, if they can get some pieces around him via free agency and the draft in the next couple of years, I think it's a good fit for Darnold. And I like Sam. And I like Sam Darnold. I think he's really shown flashes at USC, and I think he has the potential to be a good quarterback. So I like the fit.
Yeah, I know going into last year, it looked like the Jets were trying to suck for Sam, and they were on the verge of tanking there. They ended up being a lot more successful than a lot of people thought they would. I know I personally thought they'd have 0 wins last year, so they clearly surpassed that, and they were still able to get Sam Darnold. They had to make a trade up. But I love the fit. I think it's good. I'm not sold on him from a fantasy perspective. I think he'll be a good starting quarterback for a long time. But when's the last really great quarterback in the Jets? They don't really do that. They're not a strong passing team. Like you said, they're very weak when it comes to weapons. They have some okay receivers, but it's very, very thin. They haven't had a tight end in forever. The running back is very, very weak. They need plenty of help there.
Their best. Don't mean to cut you off. Their best. Yeah. If you think, as you were saying that, I was thinking back and going back. I bet you their best fantasy season a quarterback's had in the last 10 years, Zach, was probably that year Brett Favre was there.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. I feel like that makes sense. Yeah, because he slung it around.
Yeah.
But because there's no way it was a Mark Sanchez or like Josh McCown there.
Yeah.
Tebow was there for a little bit. They had a weird mix of different guys there. But yeah, it's not because I'm in a couple dynasty fantasy leagues, and he's one I definitely dropped because of his position. I think if he went to a different team like Arizona, he'd be much higher. But there in the Jets, I just don't think he's going to be very productive fantasy wise. He'll be one of those like solid backups, a bye week fill-in kind of guy. But like I said, I think he's a starter for a long time, that he'll be a very solid quarterback.
Yeah, and then at least in my opinion, we go to the opposite end of the spectrum. The Buffalo Bills, Zach, they trade up into the 7th selection and take Josh Allen out of Wyoming. Kind of a head scratcher for me. You have a big trade up for a big armed kind of raw talent kid with very shaky accuracy who, didn't put up huge numbers in a very pedestrian conference in college. I mean, this kid played at Wyoming. I mean, if you're going to play in a conference like that, you need to be putting up big numbers, i.e. Carson Wentz. I mean, Carson Wentz went to a small-time school, but he also dominated at that small-time school. So, I mean, for this, that's ultimately what my mind goes to, is the kid couldn't dominate at Wyoming. What makes me think he's going to be able to come into the NFL and step in and be successful? He's very raw. He needs a lot of time to develop, in my eyes. And I think for trading up to get him was kind of a bonehead move. And I don't like this situation that is the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen. That's just my gut feeling. I don't think it's going to pan out real well.
I hate this pick. I think this is one of the worst combinations here in the draft. That you mentioned a lot of the problems Josh Allen has. I think he's one of the lower on this top tier of quarterbacks, probably even the lowest out of this group. I'd put him below Lamar Jackson. But he also goes to an organization that has been horrible at developing their own players. Their best player, LaShawn McCoy, came to them through a trade. They don't really develop, especially offensive players. They're a disaster at weapons outside of McCoy. The last quarterbacks they've drafted, we've had J.P. Lossman, we had E.J. Manuel. Like they're not good at taking quarterbacks in the first round. So based on the history, based on his question marks, I just don't see this working out. Although I would be very surprised if he doesn't start very early on. He has very little competition there with A.J. McCarron and Nathan Peterman.
Yep.
5 interceptions and a half himself there, battling it out. Another Bills quarterback draft pick.
Yep. Yeah, it's funny how like scouts and national media members like blow their load when a kid has a huge arm. Like this kid at the combine, like chucked the ball 80 yards. Like, great. That's awesome. How many times you throw the ball 80 yards in a game? Once, maybe at the end of the half or at the end of the game? Who gives a shit? Like, same thing happened with Jamarcus Russell. Jamarcus Russell, oh, man, he could sit on his knees at the 50-yard line and throw the ball through the uprights. Who cares? This isn't the Harlem Globetrotters. Like, I don't give a fuck. Like, he needs to be able to stand in the pocket, complete passes, improvise when things aren't there. Like, no.
Read the defense.
Like, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, no. It's just the kid's so raw, and I just you make a lot of good points to do with the Bills and they're kind of the disaster that is the Bills' offensive players. So, yeah, I don't like it. So, yeah, now let's go to the opposite end of the spectrum, in my opinion, where this is the best fit for a rookie quarterback, and Josh Rosen going 10 to the Arizona Cardinals. Coming into this draft, I thought Rosen was the best quarterback out of this draft class. I was really high on him, very ready to play. Obviously, we'll learn and get better and with experience. But as far as like ready to play, most ready, NFL ready, Rosen's the guy. And dropped a little bit, but I think in the end that's going to benefit him because I think he goes to a nice system. He can stay out on the West Coast. He's familiar with the West Coast. He likes the warmer weather. He's a Cali kid. So, look, I think in a Mike McCoy offense, he gives them a kind of shot in the arm. He gives this franchise kind of a shot in the arm that it needs because, look, they have Sam Bradford there, but I'm sure it'll be probably May 1st. It'll probably be another 4 to 5 weeks before he's injured, probably, shopping at a Whole Foods somewhere. He'll probably get his foot broken, run over by a shopping cart or something, his luck. But yeah, I mean, let's be real. And then he also has Mike McGlynn there. So I think Rosen has a legit shot relatively early to get playing time, and ultimately I think he will. And ultimately I think he's going to make the most of it. Most of it. He's a great running back in David Johnson. He'll get him back. If they can get some nice weapons too around him at the wide receiver position, the offense slowly but surely setting up pretty nicely. So I love the Josh Rosen.
I am in 100% agreement there. I really like the kid, smart guy coming out of UCLA there. And he's, like you mentioned, he's very set up with some good weapons. He's got some of the better check down weapons in the league when it comes to David Johnson, one of the best receiving running backs in the league. Larry Fitzgerald, one of the most reliable receivers in the entire league. And Ricky Seals-Jones, who really came on last year at the tight end position. And he can rely on him as well. And they're building some other pieces. They have some good athletes there at receiver with J.J. Nelson. They just drafted Christian Kirk. Hopefully someone works out there to kind of replace Larry Fitzgerald as he gets towards the end of his career. But I love this pick here with Josh Rosen going to the Cardinals. I think this was one of the best fits. They were fortunate to have him fall that far, but works out beautifully for that team. And like you mentioned, with Sam Bradford in place there, it shouldn't be long till Josh Rosen is getting some starts, and I expect it to be somewhat early this coming year.
And one thing I love about the Cardinals is they saw Rosen drop. They said, look, we can get this kid. Let's trade up. Let's jump in front of Miami, who they were the pick behind Miami. So they jumped essentially 2 spots only. But I'm sure Miami, if he fell to Miami, that Miami was probably going to take him. So they said, you know what, screw it. Like, we need a quarterback for the future. Let's do it. This is what we need. And I love how they were aggressive in it. And ultimately, I think it's going to pay off. So kudos to them, and good for Josh Rosen. Goes number 10, but ultimately I think will be the winner of the quarterbacks in this draft. Lastly, Baltimore trades with the Philadelphia Eagles for pick 32, the last pick in the first round. They slide back up into the first round, and they take quarterback Lamar Jackson out of Louisville. I've tried for a long time, Zach, to try to wrap my head around Lamar Jackson. Look, dynamic player, can improvise with his legs. He's a pretty good arm. Accuracy's not bad. But there's just like something in my gut that tells me like I don't think he's going to succeed at the NFL level. Maybe be a fill-in kind of, lower tier NFL quarterback, but that's just my gut feeling. Now, as far as situations go, I think he's in a good spot. He will obviously sit this year behind Joe Flacco, barring some sort of injury. This is Flacco's last year on his deal. So he'll sit behind Flacco. He has some good he has some good coordinators there. Greg Roman, offensive coordinator. He was a coordinator in San Francisco when Kaepernick was there, and he also helped Tyrod Taylor turn into a pretty good quarterback. Substantial quarterback there. So I think he's in a nice position. But I'm on the fence, man. So help me out here. Push me one way or the other. I'm on the fence. What's your opinion on Lamar Jackson going to Baltimore? Because I'm not sure.
So one of the things that stood out to me was, I don't remember off the top of my head who exactly it was, but the head coach, I believe, the two coaches within their organization. One coach, Michael Vick, when he was in Atlanta, and another coach, Colin Kaepernick, when he was with the 49ers. So they have that background of working with an athletic quarterback like that. And I really like that for the developmental process, and especially because he'll have plenty of time to develop there behind Joe Flacco, who's definitely going to be the starter this year, most likely next year as well. I forget how long his contract is. But
his contract's it's up after this year.
I didn't think so. I was pretty sure because they just recently signed him to a longer term deal.
Yeah, but that was when they were in the Super Bowl, which was a while ago. Think about it. It was probably like 6 years ago, 5-6 years ago. You gonna look that up? You want me to look it up?
Why don't you look it up there, and then I'll go through some more of my thoughts there with Lamar.
Yeah, go ahead.
The thing I would be concerned about is if he was coming in with the current Ravens roster. We talked about this last year, and I don't feel like they've really improved at all. But they just have a mess of nonsense at their positions that they need their biggest weapons. Receiver is a jumble of guys that are cast-offs from other teams. Running back is the same thing. They have Alex Collins, who's given up one by Seattle. They got Kenneth Dixon, who they drafted a couple years ago, missed all of last year. They're very weak there, and they need to build around. They need to build around that quarterback position. They just took kind of oddly 2 tight ends in this past draft, so they're trying to help out with that position. But I like the opportunity that he has to develop there, and I think they can create a path to him having success once he gets a chance to play. And I'm excited to see him at the NFL level and see what he can do.
Yeah, so he signed Flacco signed a 3-year extension in 2016, so it'll be up after 19. But I think that last year might be an option year, so maybe they decline it, maybe they pick it up. I'm not sure. Yeah. But you're right. He did sign the 3-year extension, which I completely forgot about. So good call there. As far as the rest of the first round, Zach, maybe just kind of go through. Obviously, we'll go through the NFC East here in a second, but let's kind of go through and just pick out some guys that we liked, some situations that we really liked and were really high on, and then maybe some guys and some situations that we're really low on. So I'll get it started here with a couple situations that I liked, and then I'll go through a couple that I didn't like, and then I'll let you kind of just kind of go from there. So some situations that I liked is I talked about it briefly. I love Denver getting Bradley Chubb. Love that. I mean, you talk about an absolute gift. I mean, you talk about a freaking gift just falling in your lap. Like I said, I think he was one of the top 2 overall players in this draft. And to be able to now pair him with Von Miller, boy, that's fantastic. That is absolutely fantastic. So I like what Denver did. They didn't force the quarterback situation, which I love. Mm-hmm. I love that John Elway did that, because I've talked about it a lot on this show. I've talked about it on other shows, that I don't feel like teams should force the quarterback issue. If there's not a guy there that you are absolutely in love with and you say, this guy is going to win us the Super Bowl, then don't effing take him. Get another good player in there, and that's what the Broncos did. They got a playmaker, dynamic defensive lineman, and Bradley Chubb, who will make an impact right away. Another guy I like, a situation I like, Calvin Ridley going to Atlanta, just for the fact that you pair him with Julio Jones. Like, good night. Like, usually with these wide receivers that go in the first round, it's like they're thrown in, they're the guy right away, you know? And I don't think Ridley would have done well in that situation. Like, I think if Ridley would have went in the top, 15 or somewhere around there where he had to be the guy for a team, I don't think it would have worked out that well. But now he gets to go and he gets to learn under Julio. He gets the privilege and the luxury, I should say, of teams double covering him, and then Jones, and now he'll be open. So I really like the Calvin Ridley situation. Great route runner, very good hands, and another Alabama wide receiver. Atlanta seems to like Alabama wide receivers, don't they? So those are the 2 that stood out to me. You got two, like 1 or 2 that you really like in the first round, Zach?
The first one that we've got to talk about here is the Giants selection there at number 2. Saquon Barkley kind of fell to them. I'm interested to see your thoughts, because I know you love that Bradley Chubb falling to the Broncos because of him being one of the top players in the draft. I love selecting the best player available for a lot of these teams, and I feel like that's what the Giants did. They have so many holes, and I fully agree with that. But I think this is a guy you can't turn down at that position there. And I really like that pick for the Giants. I think it is a good fit, but they still need plenty more work. They're going to take more years to put together that offensive line, that defense that they've had all kinds of trouble with. So go ahead with your thoughts there on Barkley going to the Giants.
Initially, I hated it. Initially, I thought, and I said weeks leading up to the draft, that if they didn't take a quarterback at number 2, that they were stupid. Just because, I mean, you don't know how much Eli has left.
Right.
You don't have really anything behind him. So why not get yourself one of these quarterbacks that you can stash and develop, and then hopefully in 2 to 3 years when Eli calls it a career, they're ready to insert and step in. Because, I mean, look, like we've seen in the NFL draft, I mean, you do not know when you're going to be in that top 3 or 5 again. I mean, things can turn around very quickly. I mean, we see it with teams every year that go from, last place in a division to first place and making a deep playoff run, and all of a sudden they're picking at 25 to 32 in that range. And, when in reality you could really use a quarterback. So, look, great player.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. Like, he's going to be a very good pro, and he's going to take a lot of pressure off of Eli going forward. But the defense still stinks.
True.
Beckham's still a head case. The offensive line still stinks.
Mm-hmm.
So, man, I still think if I was the GM of the Giants, I'm still going to stick to my guns and say I would have took a quarterback. But this isn't a bad consolation prize. Yeah. Barkley's a great player, and he's going to do very well. And I'm not looking forward to facing him and Ezekiel Elliott 4 times this year. So, yeah, but you can't be mad at drafting Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to go to a couple other teams here that stood out. The Colts, I like that they did not get fancy. They've had all kinds of offensive line problems. Andrew Luck's had so many injuries because of it. And they went out and took the best guard available in Quentin Nelson. I love that pick for them. I think that's 100% the right decision. And from that to I'm always very intrigued by trades, and I think the Saints made one of the worst ones to give up a future first-round pick to move up and select Marcus Davenport, a defensive end. They paid the price of the teams that moved up to get a quarterback and then didn't take a quarterback. They took a defensive lineman. That was a very weird move there to me in giving up that much value for a player like that. He's a fine player, but that is a lot that they spent to move up there. And then the other one I wanted to bring up is the Chargers had the luxury of Derwin James falling the whole way to them at number 17. He was a guy that's been talked a lot about as a top 10 pick. He is going to be a great fit on that team that's already got one of the best corners in the league with Casey Hayward. Their defense just continues to improve. I know that's a team you really liked last year. They grew on me as the year went on, and I love that pick for them. I think that's going to work out really, really well. As for the Calvin Ridley pick, I love it for the NFL. I love it for the Falcons in real life. I think it's a great pick. I think for fantasy purposes, he's not going to – his stats aren't going to excite. He's going to be a solid number 2 receiver. Like you mentioned, Julio Jones is still going to be Julio Jones unless he has an injury. Ridley will be – he'll be – I see him right around that like 700, 800 yards, maybe like 5-6 touchdowns for the next couple of years. And I think that's fine. But I think some people will expect him to be a star there playing with Matt Ryan, being that number 2 receiver that they haven't had since Roddy White. But I don't expect him to be on that level. He's a good receiver, but not on that level.
Yeah, I would echo the same sentiment. I definitely agree with that. Just to double back, love the Derwin James pick. Absolutely. I mean, that might have been the steal of the first round to get that guy to slip the way he did. The Quentin Nelson pick I love as well. They needed offensive line help, and they got, in my opinion, the best offensive lineman. I mean, this kid is an absolute mauler, and he's going to be making an impact from day one. I was actually talking with a couple guys last week. It was like two or 3 days before the draft, and they asked who my can't miss prospect is. Like, who was the guy that you think, like, I think is going to be a fantastic player for the longevity of his career? And this is the guy I said, Quentin Nelson. I think he's going to be fantastic. So I really like that pick. As far as some of the picks we don't like and that are just absolute head scratchers, you touched on Marcus Davenport. Absolutely, that's one for sure. The one to me,
Did you?
though,
I'm curious with him. Did you just hate the trade like me, or do you not like the player either?
well, I don't like either for where they were. I think one, he got drafted a little. I think that's a little too high for him. This was a guy that wasn't even supposed to be a first-round draft pick up until like the last couple of weeks or so. I mean, he's just kind of one. He's been one of those kind of risers as the end of the year, then into the pro day, and then into the combine, and then into the draft. He just kind of slowly was working his way up. So, and then the trade. I mean, that's just dumb. Like, you don't do that. Like for a defensive end, like you don't. Like you don't do that. And I'm not a fan of it at all. But the moment in this draft where I literally said out loud, I said, "Wow," when the pick was made, was the Seahawks pick of Rashad Penny, running back from San Diego State. For him to be a first-round pick that's a joke. Like, I'm just going to be honest with you, dude. Like, that's a joke. Good running back in the Mountain West Conference there at San Diego State. Had one of the more productive college running backs ever. But there's a fine line from college running back and playing college running back in the Mountain West Conference versus playing running back in the NFL and the NFC West. Like, I just do not. I just don't like it. Like, I don't like it. You saw the Eagles take Donnell Pumphrey last year, the guy that came before Penny at San Diego State, and Penny broke all this guy's records. And he didn't do anything this year. He got hurt, battled injuries, couldn't stay healthy because of his size. And I kind of see the same thing with Penny. I just don't see it working out. So this, as far as first-round picks go, this was my least favorite first-round pick.
That's another one that's very similar to what I was saying with the Bills and Josh Allen. That when is the last time the Seahawks have drafted a running back that's done anything? The last
Shaun
great running
Alexander,
back they had,
probably, right?
Who?
Shaun Alexander?
Yeah, that's what I'd say. That was way back in the 2000s. And it was because since then they traded for Marshawn Lynch, who's been their best back since, but they've gone through a mess of CJ Prosise. They had JD McKissick last year. Mike Davis has been there. They've gone through so many running backs and it hasn't worked out. And I see it being similar. I don't see them being able to develop a running back there. And him, like you were saying, like that was way too high for me. I felt like that with a lot of these running backs, that they were not necessarily always too high, but they're just in good situations, but not an all-around back outside of Saquon Barkley. The rest of them, they have major flaws. They can't do something that's significant that's going to keep them off the field. And he's one that I don't see ending up as a 3-down back. I don't see him developing and continuing to improve as he goes on. I think he's in a good situation to get a lot of carries, but that's where it ends for me for liking him. And I was amazed. I mean, I have a current ongoing Dynasty Fantasy Football draft today. It just started today, and someone took him 3rd overall, which I thought was crazy. I would not touch that. I would not touch that at all.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's wow. Yeah, that's crazy. So let's kind of talk about the NFC East, Zach, and the division that we pay the most attention to, obviously, with both of our favorite teams being in there. So I don't know if you're the same way. I would imagine you are. But when the NFL draft happens, you pay attention to the other teams in the division. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, definitely. Because it's always the teams the Cowboys are matching up with. And it's a lot of the teams I end up watching the most just because I'm playing the Cowboys. I'm here outside the DC area, so I see the Redskins play a lot. So I'm interested in seeing what those teams do and what they'll look like coming up.
So I'll just go out by saying this right away. I think as a whole, I think the NFC East did really well drafting. I do. I think each team in their own right had a pretty good draft. So let's start with Washington, Zach. Let's kind of go down and just talk about briefly what they did. First round pick to go to Ron Payne, defensive lineman out of Alabama, who very good player, very productive player at Alabama. If you remember, they took drawing a blank on his name, but they took a defensive lineman from Alabama last year as well. Allen, not Josh Allen. What was his name? Last name was Allen, but I forget. He slipped because of injury concerns. Mm-hmm. So they took him. They snatched him up. So they drafted another Alabama defensive lineman in the first round this year. So I like their thought process. Let's try to beef up the defensive line, at least one of the lines here, because look, as we saw, offensive and defensive line are extremely important. So I like the thought process there. And then they get a really, in my opinion, a steal in the draft with Darius Geis in the second round, running back from LSU, who I kind of wanted the Eagles to take at 32 had they stayed pat there and not traded out. It came to be that he had some off-the-field issues. He didn't do well in interviews, came off as cocky and lazy, and, so that's part of the reason why they said he slipped. But good value pick there. And then they got some guys, another defensive lineman, Tim Settle in the 5th round, who I remember coming out of high school, was contemplating going to Michigan, ended up going to Virginia Tech. I think that's a decent value pick. He didn't really live up to the hype at Virginia Tech like a lot of people thought he would. And they had some other guys along the way. But all in all, I think that the Redskins had a pretty decent draft. What is your thought on the Redskins? You like what they did, or do you think they should have went a different direction?
I think it's fine. I do like the picks they made. I question, especially Darius Geis, I question him working out there on that Redskins team. They are another team that is just a disaster at developing players. It's who they are. If he comes in and has a good first year, he's going to continue to do that, but they're not going to get better. Their best running backs have been guys they've acquired through trade or through free agency. And it's very rare that they have a guy that they draft. We've seen them go through Matt Jones. They drafted Samaje Perine last year. I think he could easily fall into this. And again, when it comes to fantasy, he's their best player last year. I watched a lot of Redskins games being around here in DC. Their best player, without a question, all of last year when he was healthy, was Chris Thompson, another running back. And he's going to take away those passing downs from Darius Geis. I think he'll be fine, but he's going to be more of a 2-down back on that team, unless they're doing something where they're playing him alongside Chris Thompson, which I see being more unusual. They might do that a little bit, but I think it's going to be more so Darius Geis on first and second down, Chris Thompson on third down, and then Chris Thompson mixing in other times as well because he's just so explosive and definitely, no question about it, their biggest playmaker. And their least mistake-prone player, too. Everyone else on that Redskins team, it just seems like they find a way to make mistakes and do something disasterful, except Chris Thompson. He just makes plays.
Yeah, he was really solid before he got hurt. He was a damn good player, and a lot of people, the people that were fortunate enough to pick him up and ride him for a while last season in fantasy were really fortunate. Transitioning to the Giants here, Zach, I really like what the Giants did, and I hate saying that, but I like what new GM Dave Gettleman did. You take Barkley at number 1 or number 2 overall with their first pick. Obviously, we talked about that. Fantastic pick. Offensive lineman Will Hernandez out of UTEP, great pick to get him. Somehow he fell out of the first round. I was kind of surprised there. They also took Lorenzo Carter, another offensive lineman out of Georgia. I think he could be productive as well. A little undersized, but I think if he slides down and plays guard, he'll have better success. But because he's kind of short for the tackle position, I think he's only like 6'4". He's like 6'3" or 6'4", which for a tackle, those guys are usually 6'7", somewhere around there. So, but I think he can be a nice player. And then they got some guys, some more defensive guys, and they also drafted another quarterback. Someone you and I talked about briefly. You said it's probably just going to be another Davis Webb, situation with Kyle Laletta from the University of Richmond. I didn't even know Richmond had a football team. So overall, I like what the Giants did. I think they got some pieces that will ultimately help them going forward and kind of help them pretty early. So I like what the Giants did. Thoughts?
Yeah, they did really well early on. I'm 100% in agreement there. Barkley is a can't miss prospect right now. I'm excited to see what he looks like in the NFL. Will Hernandez, like you mentioned, projected first round pick, fell to that early second round. And then I'll just jump right to Laletta there. That he's a guy that they can kind of develop and see what he has. And maybe they will think he's going to be something, but I see him more as some of these others, like a Matt Flynn when he was in Green Bay, that they develop. He's there. They don't really need him. If they're going to go a different direction, they'll draft someone else. They'll bring in a free agent. I think he's going to be more like take a chance, take a shot at one of those like third tier quarterbacks and see what he has. And if it works out, great. If it doesn't, they didn't invest that much. He was a lower round pick there in the fourth round. And I think that'll be fine with them. Same thing with Davis Webb. Like he'll be there, he'll be developing, but I really don't see either of those guys being their long-term solution at any point.
For sure. I could not agree more. I echo those words wholeheartedly. Now to your squad, the Dallas Cowboys. They take Leighton Vander Esch, linebacker in the first round, linebacker out of Boise State. A guy with not a lot of football experience, but was the Mountain West Defensive Player of the Year last year. Had a little bit of a neck injury that's, maybe a little worrisome, but should be okay. Hopefully, they obviously want that to be a guy they can build around on the defensive side of the football. And then some other guys that they got, Connor Williams, offensive lineman out of Texas. Michael Gallup, wide receiver out of Colorado State. I think when I look at the Cowboys draft, I'm okay with it. I'm pretty good with it. I think the word that comes to mind when I think of the Cowboys draft, though, Zach, is value. I think the guys that they got at the position where they got them were very good value picks. Connor Williams falling to the second round. He was kind of on the verge there of first round, second round talent. You get him halfway through the second round. I think it's a good value pick. Michael Gallup, a very productive receiver at Colorado State. You get him on the third day, in the third round. Another good player. So I kind of like what the Cowboys did as far as their value picks. Zach. Now, obviously, you're the guy when it comes to the Cowboys. So what's your opinion on what the Cowboys did during the draft?
The biggest thing I was happy about with this draft is that they didn't panic. So many teams, they see a need and they immediately feel like they have to fill it. And that's what I was most concerned about. In this draft where there's a lot of decent receivers that'll probably end up being number 2, number 3, number 4 receivers on various teams throughout the NFL. There's none that really stood out as a number 1 receiver. And that was my biggest fear, that the Cowboys were going to try and draft one of these guys that's not built to be a number 1 receiver and try and make him a number 1 receiver. And I felt like they were set up for a lot of disappointment if they took that path. And a lot of people thought that's what they were going to do. But fortunately, I was happy they didn't go that direction. They kind of took who was there. It might not have been that flashy or that exciting, but I was still happy with it. I know Vander Esch, I've heard a lot of good things. I haven't gotten to really watch much of his highlights or anything like that. But I'm very happy with that pick. The Cowboys have a lot of needs. It would have been incredible if Derwin James fell another 2 spots to the Cowboys and they could have got him. They've had safety issues since Roy Williams was there in 2006. So it's been a long, long time since they've had a dominant safety. I would have loved to get him, but didn't quite work out there. And I would have never thought that they even have a chance at him. But they did well not panicking. The Vander Esch pick, I'm happy with that. Connor Williams, he was a guy that was projected in the first round heading into last season and then really had a down year there in Texas. So I like taking a chance on him. They've had some issues along the offensive line, what was once such a dominant offensive line. So I like that to try and build around him. And I feel confident there too because the Cowboys have done so well drafting offensive linemen. I've loved their history on that. So I'd expect him to come away at least being a solid player there, even though he had those issues of dropping off last year. I'm interested to see what Michael Gallup brings. I was happy with that pick because, like I said, some of those top receivers there in the draft, I didn't feel like they were a number one receiver. I feel the same way with Michael Gallup. But being that he's a third-round pick, I don't think he'll have quite that pressure. They're most likely going to rely more on Allen Hurns and Terrence Williams at first with Cole Beasley in the slot. I would expect Cole Beasley's receptions to really, really go up without Jason Witten there. And to him, I would be highly surprised if Cole Beasley doesn't lead the Cowboys in receptions this year. But I think Gallup fills in with that. We've seen Bryce Butler have some moments the past couple of years. He just signed with Arizona this past year, so I think Gallup can fill that in. And if he does well, that Terrence Williams starting spot is very easy to be taken away. Williams just has been his same mediocre self for a while, and the Cowboys have been fine with it, but haven't really upgraded it. So if Gallup can show some things, I think he can easily take over that number 2 spot at their receiver. So I was very happy with the top of their draft. We'll see what the rest of the draft brings. Nobody else really stood out that much. I do want to bring up Dalton Schultz because they did take a tight end, although it was lower in the draft. I know we'll get to this, but I thought the Eagles made an incredibly smart move to move just ahead of the Cowboys and choose tight end Dallas Goedert there, what most people thought was the number 1 tight end in the draft. And they snatched him away from the Cowboys. I would have loved to see him there in Dallas. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. So we'll see if Dalton Schultz can contribute at all, or if they find someone from their current roster that they can work out there. It'll be interesting to see how they recover from not having Jason Witten.
Yeah. Witten retires kind of suddenly, and I didn't think it was coming. One of the great Cowboys of all time, obviously a surefire Hall of Famer, just one of the good guys in the NFL. I remember when he came out of the University of Tennessee. I remember getting his rookie card. That was a long time ago. That's crazy to think. But real quick, Zach. Give the Cowboys a grade. What grade would you give their draft?
B. It was
give them a B.
Solid, not outstanding, anything like that. But
okay.
Happy with it.
Yeah, I think that's where I would put it. Maybe a C plus.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd be okay with that. And then, like you said, the Eagles. We'll transition to them. Lastly, interesting draft for them. They had the last pick of the first round. They traded it out to Baltimore to get some more picks because they didn't have a second or a third round pick. So they got a couple picks there. They got a second round pick for next year. You think about their draft next year. You got a first and 2 seconds for a team that just won the Super Bowl. That's pretty nice. Mm-hmm. So fast forward to the second round, which is where the Eagles' first pick came, and like Zach said, they make another trade and they jump in front of Dallas and ultimately take a guy named Dallas Goedert from South Dakota State, tight end, who, like you said, some people think was the best tight end in the draft, which he's a very talented kid, very talented. I was watching some of his highlight tapes. He has a very good catch radius, runs good routes. And with the Eagles losing Trey Burton and Brent Selleck this offseason, tight end obviously was a need for them. And I mean I think that's really going to help this offense, an offense that was very explosive last year. I just think this is a guy that can come in and really help. Pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. I would expect him to come in and be in that 2 tight end kind of rotation, and when Ertz needs a blow, he'll get that reps. So I think Goddard's going to come in and really contribute a lot here in this first his rookie year. So some of the other things that they did, they took Josh Sweat, defensive end out of Florida State. Some people thought was a first-round pick, kind of had some injury concerns, but I talked about value pick with the Cowboys. This is a great value pick for the Eagles. Just an absolute awesome pass rusher to add to an already fantastic defensive line. And this is a guy that can kind of – and I love this pick. This is a guy that can kind of stash, kind of just, have him learn from the Brandon Grahams and the, Michael Bennett's and the Fletcher Coxes of the world and say, hey, when your time's ready, let's play ball. Because, when those guys kind of fizzle out, it's going to be Derek Barnett and Josh Sweat. That's a great tandem to have once Brandon Graham and Chris Long and those guys kind of third time kind of comes and goes. So I like that there. They also drafted an offensive lineman from the University of TCU, I want to say. I'm trying to think who else they drafted here, Zach. If you have their draft picks in front of you, I'm not sure if you do, but
yeah, because Matt Pryor was who you're looking for.
Matt Pryor, that's who it was. Yep, Matt Pryor. Which is funny because they drafted an offensive lineman from TCU last year in Halapuli Pati, however the hell you say his name, Vaitai. We just call him Big V around here. But yeah, they drafted him out of TCU last year, and they take this kid Pryor out of TCU again, and then I know they drafted that rugby player
Jordan Malata,
Malata, in the seventh round, which is interesting. And we were talking before we came on the air. I like what the Eagles did just because they didn't have a lot of glaring needs. So it was just kind of some guys that they thought, look, with like Josh Sweat and this Malata guys that, look, let's take a chance on them. We set ourselves up for that. So let's take a shot with them and see if they pan out. And then the Goddard pick, like I said, I really like. I think he'll come in and he'll contribute right away. So I like what the Eagles did. I give them a B. I'd probably give them a B as well. I'd give them a B. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the number one way to describe their draft was value. They did really well. They're not in urgent need of a lot of positions like we've seen many other teams. So they were able to trade back, get some value in the future, and then kind of take some chances on some guys like a Josh Sweat that kind of fell a little bit. He might have some issues, but that's something they feel comfortable taking a chance on. Same thing with Dallas Goedert. That's kind of a luxury to have a better number 2 tight end than plenty of teams have as a starting tight end. And that's something the Eagles have always valued for the last probably 15 years. They've always had a solid number 2 tight end, and they go with it once again. And that brings me to one other thought I've had with this draft is
sure.
When it comes to fantasy leagues, I know I mentioned a couple times how I'm in some dynasty leagues. I value tight ends very, very highly. I've one league, we only start 1 tight end, but I have 5 on my roster. It makes a huge difference if you can have a tight end. Saying that, I hated this tight end class. You've got Dallas Goedert's probably the most talented one, but he ends up in that Trey Burton role as a number 2 tight end. So he's going to be stuck behind Zach Ertz for the next 3 to 4 years. I don't like that for fantasy purposes. Mike Gesicki, great athlete. He's probably going to be a starter there in Miami. When is the last time Miami has had a relevant tight end? Because you can't think of it. I'm going to tell you. It was Randy McMichael. Fucking 2007. Yep. You were going to get that too. I was going to be impressed there. But yeah, he's a great athlete. The Dolphins they don't maximize their tight ends. They've been through a whole mess of guys that if he catches a touchdown, great. If he doesn't do that, he's going to have 22 yards, just like
Anthony Fasano.
They've had good athletes there too with Jordan Cameron, Julius Thomas. Yeah, you mentioned Fasano, and none of them are productive. I just hate that. Same thing with the Ravens. I can't think of one since Shannon Sharp that they've had a good tight end in freaking 99 or whenever that was in the early 2000s. But they took 2 as well. They took Hayden Hurst, who is an old rookie at 25, which is very unusual, and they took him in the first round. And then they came back with Mark Andrews, another one of the top tight ends, and they took him. For a team that doesn't really use their tight end anyway, they're going to have 2 there. I think that really detracts from each other. And then the only one that is a little bit interesting to me is Ian Thomas there in Carolina, who's going to develop behind Greg Olsen. Maybe he has a chance to do something, but he's still not like someone that really stood out. So I am excited about 0 tight ends in this draft class. I've loved them in the past. I always find there's value in tight ends. It's one of the most underrated positions, in my opinion. But this year's class, hated this.
Yeah, I think you would say that this draft class was definitely leaned more to the defensive side of the ball than the offensive side of the ball. I mean, think about it. I mean, think about other than the quarterbacks. I mean, running backs really was Barkley the only one in the first round?
No, it's Barkley, Sony Michel, and Rashad Penny that they.
Oh yeah, so that's right. So I forgot about Sony Michel and Rashad Penny shouldn't even have been in the first round. So I mean, and then wide receivers, there wasn't the overwhelming wide receivers in the first round, kind of like you expect. So very defensive heavy as far as the draft goes. That's kind of one thing that I took from it. The skill position guys, like if this was a draft where you really needed skill position guys, not the draft you got real excited for. Maybe that's something that team, your team, is going to have to look to get next year. So I was actually looking at it was yesterday, either yesterday or Sunday night. They had a way too early 2019 mock draft. I'm like, you got to be kidding me! Like, Jesus, the draft just already started, and but it's still fun to look at some of the names that are coming out next year. Some of the names that I know from college football, and there's going to be some really nice pieces coming out next year. So I look forward to that. Anything else, Zach, you want to add here with our draft talk?
Hopefully that is the case, because like you mentioned, with some of these skill position guys being kind of disappointing. I know I'm in 2 dynasty leagues, both of them I traded completely out of the first round, picked up more picks next year. So hopefully that class is a good class. A lot of these players just have major problems or can't do something significant. You mentioned the running backs there, which is where it stands out the most for me. You got Sony Michel, who has a fumbling problem on a team whose coach hates fumbling and will bench a player for games for fumbling. We've seen that happen before. Darius Geis, like I mentioned, he's there with Chris Thompson, who's going to take away passing downs. Rashad Penny, Seattle can't develop a running back. He's going to play. He's going to get action, but we'll see. Nick Chubb went to Cleveland. They already signed Carlos Hyde. They've already got a receiving back in Duke Johnson. Royce Freeman's in the mess of running backs there in Denver. Kerryon Johnson's there in Detroit, but they love Theo Riddick. Amir Abdullah in the passing game. Ronald Jones is in Tampa. He's got a clear path to that number 1 running back position, but he doesn't really do anything unless he breaks a long run. That's all he did through college. Nyheim Hines is on the Colts, who are a mess at running backs, but he's more of a third down back. It's just the whole list is just like, man, they all have major problems. Two guys that stood out to me as taking a chance late on that I'd love to get my hands on one of these guys in the draft because of what could happen next offseason. So the first one is Ito Smith, who's drafted by the Falcons. Tevin Coleman, his contract's about to expire after this coming season, so he could be moving on. That's a team that for years has used 2 running backs. He could be a guy that fills in there if they don't get somebody else. And then Boston Scott, in a similar situation in New Orleans, who has always used 2 running backs or more for as long as I can remember, from Deuce McAllister to Reggie Bush to Tavares Cadet to Chris Ivory. They've been through so many, Tim Hightower multiple times. And now it's the same thing with Mark Ingram, Alvin Kamara. Ingram is an expiring contract this year, so he will be a free agent next year. With Alvin Kamara playing so well at so young, I'd be amazed if they'd pay big money for Ingram. So that's something that he could have that opportunity to be what we've seen from all these kind of, especially like low draft picks. That's what the Saints have used in the past to be that number 2 guy. And I wouldn't be surprised if he could eventually fill in that role. So those are 2 guys that stood out to me as potential 2-year value, depending on what happens in free agency with those other 2 guys.
There you go. Yeah, that'll pretty much wrap things up. I like kind of what we got through there. I like going through the first round and talking about the NFC East and talking about some stuff we liked and some stuff we didn't like, and even throwing some fantasy talk there for the listeners. So, anything else, Zach, before we head out?
I feel like we covered it real well there. So let us know any thoughts you have, anything we missed, anything you agree with. Any thoughts like that. We'd love to hear it. We always love any feedback, any conversation on these topics, especially the NFL draft. What a great time of the year.
Absolutely. And I agree with Zach. Anything you guys can tell us to make things better or something you didn't like, whatever the case may be, let us know. Other than that, we will be back again next time for another edition of the Lifelong Rivals Sports Podcast. Until then, everyone take care and enjoy recapping the NFL draft.
Enjoy it. Have a great week. Thanks so much for listening to the Lifelong Rivals Sports Podcast. We really appreciate it. If you're enjoying what you're listening to, please give us a follow. Let us know your feedback. Share us with someone else you think would enjoy listening as well. Thank you so much for the support, and have a great week.